I'll call this meeting to order. We're under the resolution that was adopted at the May 18th meeting of the board to meet virtually for the duration of this emergency. We have minutes that were revised a little bit late in the month. I hope everybody's had a chance to read them and see if there's any question about those. I know there were a couple of small adjustments made that David may touch on later in this meeting. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about the minutes that were delivered to you on the 19th of January? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mike. Again, we'll do this as a group. All in favor? Aye.
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 Anyone who objects? Good. They're adopted unanimously. Are there any announcements from the Board of Trustees that you'd like to make before the meeting starts? I guess it's been a pretty quiet month. Are there any comments from the public? David, do you have anything?
I don't have anybody with a hand raised. If there's any member of the public attending that would like to make a comment now, you can raise your hand and I'll allow you to speak. I'm not getting any raised hands, Marcy.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll start with our continuing education. Meredith Dickens is going to be talking with us about the Local Voices project that's been ongoing, that I hope you all have seen coming into the collection. Thank you, Meredith.
Hey, hello, as I pop into view. So yes, I'm here to talk about the Local Voices collection. The quick URL for this, if you want more information about it, is jmrl.org/localvoices. It's very easy to remember. Let's see, so this collection was born in the fall of 2017. And prior to that, JMRL Collection Development, when treated requests from local authors to include their book in the collection, the same way we treated every other request. We looked for reviews in industry publications. We asked if it was available to purchase from our trusted library vendors. We judged the physical quality, the binding and design and content quality. Was it thoroughly edited against standards that are normalized against what the big publishers give us and what our readers are used to. And these standards are really good to have for our purchases to make sure we're spending the collection budget wisely and efficiently. But you can quickly see that they present challenges to self-published independent authors who don't get reviewed in the industry publications and might not be available for purchase everywhere. And it led to a lot of, no, we can't buy that book. And a lot of libraries, we weren't alone, just don't accept self-published materials. And so before the Local Voices collection was established, I said no a lot to these folks. And I don't like saying no to someone who is our neighbor and has made the effort to write their story or produce or publish, their work, and they want to share it with their community. It seemed counter to our mission as the library. So in that light, we established the Local Voices collection, which allows us to set aside that aforementioned selection criteria process and without reserve accept these published works, anything that anyone in our community has published or produced. And it reduces barriers to the staff time to review and process the information. It just allows us to get it on the shelf. I'm going to throw some numbers at you, so very few numbers, but in 2017 in the fall, we started with about 27 items. And in 2018, we doubled the intake of that. It was almost 50 items that we added. And those were all housed at the Central Library to start. In 2019, we expanded the local collections to Crozet, Green, and to Nelson. And then in 2020 to Louisa. So back in 2019, we doubled again from 2018, added 85 items. And then in 2020, just when the ball was rolling, 2020 happened. And so we stopped accepting donations and physically processing items for a while, but we were still able to add some titles. And this year alone, we've added another dozen. So in all, we have about 200 items in these local collections, at least one in every jurisdiction. And in the history of the collection, they've circulated 400 times, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the giant collection, but I think it's very important to the folks who are involved, probably even more important. Physically, each book, I have examples here, gets a sticker on the front to increase visibility. You can probably see it better on this one. And if you go to the URL I mentioned, that logo is on the top to brand them all as local voices. This is a good example, a really fantastic example of a book that's in the Local Voices collection. A Girl Scout troop did a project of oral history. They met with residents of the Our Lady of Peace Senior Living and wrote up the stories, the results of their interviews with folks. This kind of book, and they used Snapfish to produce it. This kind of book would get lost in our regular collection. It would not circulate. The plain binding would not appeal to folks, but in a Local Voices collection, we're able to highlight it. Anyone who's interested in local stories can find it. The Girl Scouts who were involved can walk into the library and say, that's my book on the shelf. Any youth group leader who walks into the library and says, hey, that's a great idea. That gives me an idea for my own group. All of these reasons, we want to make sure we highlight these books. So we've got books like this. We've got anthologies and collections from local groups, like Voices of Adult Learners. We've got memoirs, nonfiction, a lot of poetry, a lot of picture books. Mostly it's books so far, but we do accept, music CDs and DVDs. And let's see, excuse me. The programming staff has tied into this collection as well. We've had events in, I think it was 2018 as part of the Read Local initiative. They had a local authors fair, and they used the list of contacts that we had developed from the authors of the Local Voices collection to develop that authors fair. And we have had individual book talks by authors in the collections at various branch libraries. Excuse me. The future of this collection is open. I would like to continue growing it and increasing its visibility. Hopefully, as we open back up, we can do that. In the last week, I've gotten requests from 2 authors already, so people are learning about it. And I think there is room to grow in terms of tying into programming. We already, in addition to the events where we have authors talk, we also do programs to support the writing process. For instance, in NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month in November, we have writer workshops. We have programs throughout the year that help folks through the writing process, but then also potentially maybe through the publishing process. How do you find an editor? How do you market your book? Those things could all be tied into this collection in the future. It's also in the technology plan to explore a way to host electronic submissions. A lot of folks find it easier to self-publish through ebooks than physically printing books, but legally, like literally, we cannot accept donations of ebooks right now. There are services that we could potentially subscribe to that allow the library to collect and create a digital collection of donated materials that allows the author to retain the digital rights of their work, because that would be paramount as it's shared. So that might be the future, especially as we develop a digital branch. In a nutshell, that's the past, present, and potential future of the Local Voices collection. Again, there's the URL, jamworld.org/localvoices has the submission form and the basic guidelines. And also, if you want to see a list of all the titles in the collection, there's a link there. You can also just search for Local Voices in the catalog. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Meredith, how have authors generally heard about the collection?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when we started, and I think one other time we had sort of a press release, and we do posts on social media. We have flyers in the library when folks can come in the library, and little bookmarks they can take with, submit your work. Some of it is word of mouth, I think, but we do make sure that all our staff know about it so they can, you know, if they hear about anything, they can mention it to folks. That's where we
And
are.
what counts as local?
I'm sorry?
What counts as local?
It's anyone with a, we have, it's mostly anyone who lives within our jurisdiction.
Okay.
We have had authors who lived in our jurisdiction and have moved away since they gave us the book. But we also have a guideline that you should have a library card. So that kind of limits the folks to anyone who can get a JAMRO library card. Yeah, so I'm also a little loose about that too, since we do have boundaries like down in Scottsville and Fluvanna. We have a lot of folks who use our libraries who live in Fluvanna, so they have library cards. They don't technically live here, but they are members of the JAMRO community, so we include them as well.
Okay, thanks.
Lisa has a question or has her hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Meredith, so much for this. I was wondering if you've ever thought about doing some type of events to highlight local authors. I know the Festival of the Book this year is pretty squeezed in terms of what they're able to offer, but we've got some really great local writers who have some excellent publications coming up with, you know, major publishers. And I was wondering if you ever thought about doing some type of book night or something where the author gets to kind of come, or you maybe get someone to interview them or talk with them or something like that. You know, I think that could be a lot of fun, especially since a local author might have a difficult time getting the representation to get into the book festival,
Right.
but still has really excellent, you know, work to showcase.
Absolutely, yes, and we do. So I mentioned that local authors fair that that happened pretty much within the first year of this, and I believe that the programming staff. I'm not in charge of programming, but I work with them, and I believe that I think they had in mind to do another one before the shutdown happened. So it'll probably be soon, and that would be where we have one day where everybody, like a little mini festival, everybody comes and shares together. But we do have ongoing slate of author talks. And Evident Northside is really great about finding local authors and to come talk about their works. So yes, fantastic idea. And I hope that we do more of them in the future.
Great, thank you so much.
I know that the programming staff works hard to have authors visit when they can, and especially during this pandemic, that's opened up a little bit. I know Krista's online here, maybe she can G-chat me about it, but their book club on Thursday last week had the author Zoom in, which is maybe something that wouldn't be able to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. And I would say that this collection allows, it goes both ways. You know, they were saying, how did they find out about this collection? We do have authors who say, I want to do an event at the library. And then we say, oh, you can also donate your book to this collection. But this, in the same way, when you go to the page for adding your book to this collection, there is a little comment to say, you should talk to the programming staff if you want to do a book talk with us. So it goes both ways.
Wendy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when they started, they had that local author fair here in Louisa, and they had a great turnout. There were, comparatively speaking, there were probably 10 to 12 authors here, local authors with their books, and set up and talked to visitors and all. It was really very nice. I hope they do it again.
Mike, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm curious. So my recollection of the last time I looked at the sort of online descriptions about local voices, I think it said there was a 1-year minimum, and then after that, it's sort of at the library's discretion. So for Meredith, it sounds like we probably haven't aged anything out since 2017. I'm just curious what would cause us to do that, or what you're sort of, are we aging things out, and what does that look like in terms of the time frames for these?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we put those original guidelines we gathered from a bunch of different libraries with similar collections, and we were trying to address all of the things that people might have questions about. And I actually when we expanded the collections to the extra branches, we went through them and we realized that half of them were not applicable. That one we're leaving in just in case, but I have not had to weed this collection yet. We've just been focused on growing it. If it gets to the point where it is too big, or then we will have to worry about that. But the circulation, again, each circulation of one of these books counts a lot more, whereas if something hasn't circulated in 3 years on the regular shelf, we have to question whether it's earning its space. These guys earn their space, so I can be a little bit looser on it.
Okay, great. And well, I like the comments about the looking into digital options, because that would, I think, reduce that space constraint somewhat. I mean, it's easier potentially to store things. You have to have a digital storage, but that's a different requirement than a physical storage. So I thought that was great. One last question: do we, or should we? I'm just curious. As you're talking, there are national authors with local connections. I mean, I'm reading a book right now by somebody who happens to be a UVA professor. Do we do anything to highlight that connection with materials that are sourced through the normal material selection process?
Right. Well, we don't add them to local voices, again, because usually they have enough emphasis on their own. Like John Grisham, he's not in the local voices collection. Folks can find his books on their own. That was one of the questions we had when we started the collection of where do we find things. The Adult Services does maintain lists of Virginia authors or local authors, so we can highlight things in that way. But yeah, there is a distinction between the folks who need a little spotlight and don't really.
I wonder if there's an opportunity for, I know there's tags, a lot more flexible tags in the new catalog. So I wonder if there's an opportunity for a connection there somewhere.
Absolutely. I know that one of the lists on our old sort of reader advisory tool, the wiki, we were keeping track of lists of Charlottesville authors or area authors. And I think one of the goals is to translate that into tags and lists in the new catalog. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
I also appreciate the emphasis on local authors who don't already have an infrastructure to support and promote their work. Because, everybody at UVA is supposed to be writing books of one kind or another, at least in the humanities. And, some of them are boring and you don't want to read them. So I think, John Grisham does not need our help, and other folks who are also writing books, myself included, a small committee will one day read this book, but nobody else. So it doesn't need to be in the library. So I'm thinking about folks who are, doing this and trying to get discovered, and they're already discovered because they are part of a very literate community. And so I really love the local authors collection for that. So thanks.
I just had a quick question, and sorry if you already answered this, my internet cut out for a minute there, but you mentioned that you were interested in expanding more of the music offerings in the collection there. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of strategy in place already for outreach, or what your plans are to do that.
We don't have specific plans to expand. Proportionally, we don't have a lot of music CDs or DVDs in the collection, although it's open to it. One of the things we're finding is that physical CDs are not as popular, and print, it's all digital music now. So I'm not sure if that's a direction we would absolutely accept them. I don't have a strategy for growing it that way, but certainly if anybody were interested, we could.
I guess that's a good point. The barrier of entry for circulating a digital, composition is probably a lot lower than circulating your self-published book. But I was just thinking of local resources like the Music Resource Center or someplace like that might be a good organization to reach out to if they have streams of local artists who are recording things and looking for a place to put it.
Yeah, I think the streams, because we in an analogy, Lighthouse Films, who works with kids they used to produce a DVD of all their student projects each year, and the library had those, and we moved them to the Local Voices collection. And I approached them and said, do you still do that? Can you get us DVDs? And like, oh, we don't do DVDs anymore. It's all online. So yeah, exploring ways to do that because they are all moving digitally, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments for Meredith?
I have a comment. Um, Thank you, Meredith. I think it's a wonderful idea to spotlight local people, sort of like the unsung heroes. So I think you've done a good job. Keep it up.
Anyone else? Thanks a lot, Meredith.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Meredith.
All right, moving on to new business. Tony and Mike are on a working group that's looking at putting together an employee manual. And Mike, I think, do you want to give us an update on any meetings or organization that you've had so far?
Sure. So at last month's meeting, at last month's policy committee meeting, we decided to form this working group. And that did happen. David, so Tony and I had volunteered as trustees. David, I think, did a full staff solicitation for staff members who wanted to be involved, who want to volunteer. And we ended up with Camille Thompson, branch manager of Gordon, Megan England, Scottsville branch manager, Lindsay Idison, Northside branch manager, Jerry Cardetti, JMRL business manager, David, of course, and then Tony, myself. We did have an initial meeting last week, and we've got, we're busy. We've got a whole, we've already looked at, we've collected some example employee manuals sort of ad hoc, but then systematically we're gonna research all of those from the libraries that JMRL identifies as peer libraries. So that's a stack of about 20. And then, so we're going to research those, and we've got a working document where we've got an outline started, and some of those committee members have already been busily typing things in. So it's underway. The first step is to just organize what are the high level topics, get that list kind of set, and then start filling in. One thing I want to mention that I was kind of very happy to see, David had shared with me, or David had reached out to all the branch managers and asked them for copies of their sort of orientation outlines or orientation checklists. And it turns out that a lot of the sort of some of the basic workplace type topics that you might expect to find in an employee manual were already being covered sort of on an ad hoc basis at individual branches. So some of this is going to be just writing down in a centralized place that both employees and branch managers and so forth can point to things that we're already doing. So I was pleased to see that we're not going to have to invent the wheel. It's kind of just writing down and then standardizing is the other half of that. These branches that have some of these policies or internal procedures in place are not all standardized. So I think that was something David was in particular, he saw as a benefit of this effort, is to kind of standardize across branches. If there's an employee who transfers from one branch to another, they'll be working under the same ground rules. And I think it'll just be a benefit overall. So full speed ahead, and we'll keep the. I think we will come to a representative from the working group will come to the personnel committee meeting that's coming up, and sort of coordinate there and ask how do they want to be involved. It sort of intersects with personnel and policy, so we just want to get that committee's take on how they'd like to be involved, or what the right approach is.
What is your expectation, Mike, in terms of reporting updates to the board?
I think we can report something at every meeting. Milestone, possible upcoming milestones would be, we've got an outline that's finalized. We've started fleshing out the one particular section. In my mind, it could be possible to finalize one section and get that sort of improved and put in place without the entire, because it is going to, there's a lot of work to flesh out every single section. And some of these are going to require some legal, it's research in terms of best practices, but also some legal advice. We're probably going to run a bunch of this stuff past through legal, you know, as one step in the approval chain. You know, City of Charlottesville, we've told them that we'll be sharing things with them before it goes into place. But I could foresee if the board and the relevant committees wanted to take this approach, that we would polish off one section, get that passed, polish off another section, and then incrementally get to the place where we have the whole manual in place.
I think it would
And
also,
again, workplace topics. Go ahead.
I think it would also be useful for the board to see your roadmap, the outline of what you're intending to cover, just so that we know where you're going. Is that a possibility?
So that's sort of it's in a brainstorming phase right now, but I think it'll be fairly well fleshed out by the next. My expectation would be to bring that sort of fleshed out late draft outline to the policy committee at next month's policy committee meeting, and then that would show up in the board, next month's board meeting as part of the policy report. But certainly, yes, we can put that as a handout if you're interested in that as a board meeting type of handout.
I certainly appreciate that. I think a lot of the other board members would be interested to see what your long-term goals are in terms of the organization here. Wendy? Unmute, Wendy.
Newcomb. Mike, I just wondered, you mentioned that you're going to be sharing information with the Charlottesville as well. Are you going to do that periodically or just at the end? Are you envisioning doing the same kind of thing you're doing with us?
I think it's probably wise for us to do it periodically, so that if there's any conflict, we get that
resolved.
Identified earlier than later. Definitely, the end manual is going to be a hybrid between the City of Charlottesville manual and then JMRL specific topics. What the public library consultant at the state library recommended is that we put all the topics in there, and then for ones that we default or backstop back to City of Charlottesville, we just kind of put an explicit note, see section so-and-so of City of Charlottesville. So that way it gives employees one place to look to see everything. Right now, I don't think we really have that, because City of Charlottesville itself is kind of scattershot. There's these orientation checklists that aren't really it's not clear to me that those are published in a way that employees can refer back to them. And we have internal procedures in the internet and so forth. So even the things that are going to be sort of reside in the City of Charlottesville manual, we want to have one place where it at least points to that, so we have one place to go in the first place. But yes, I think it's a great point that we need to keep them in the loop, and I think that's the intent.
And Wendy, another point, Wendy, is that the city is theoretically in the process of revising their personnel manual. And obviously they've got a few other things on their plate, and we have no indication, David mentioned we have no indication from them when that new manual of theirs will be out. So this might be at the same time as theirs, it might be before theirs, we really don't know.
Yeah, you'll just adjust as that. But no, you don't have a representative in your group from there.
No.
No.
I think our what we're looking at is much of it is sort of more specific to things that would happen at a library and that sort of than the broader scope of City of Charlottesville.
Just a quick comment on that, Wendy. So when Mike and I did meet with the head of HR at the city who just left, she did mention that many of their departments have what she referred to as standard operating procedures. So most of these things would be more in line with that than their whole personnel manual. But it is also written into JMRL's administrative agreement with the city of Charlottesville that they get to look at, we are not going to set any personnel policies that they haven't reviewed, because otherwise we use theirs. So we want to make sure there's no conflict there where JMRL says A and they say B, and there's a problem. And I did want to show briefly, you probably can't see it, but this is the personnel policy manual from 1977 that we dug up. So there's precedent here. In 1977, JMRL came up with a personnel manual, although largely it has to do with leave and vacation accrual. It doesn't get into any other kind of.
Is that part of the local authors collection as well?
I was going to ask if we could use the same cover art.
local history collection. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you all for.
Any other questions or comments for Mike or Tony? Great. So I guess we'll be hearing these intermittently as committee reports and as working group updates. We do have a personnel committee report. Carla and the personnel committee met about 10 days ago.
Yeah, not even.
Not even.
Yeah, not even.
Wise.
Yeah, so just really quickly, the personnel committee met last week and we had two kind of big topics that the board had asked us to look at. And basically we're gonna, do some research and discuss within the personnel committee and then take it back to the board for larger discussion. So the two main topics are the accrual rate for employees' annual leave. This is something that is different for the library versus what our localities do. And so we're just doing a little research to see what each of the localities do and what some of our neighboring libraries and big employers do in terms of their accrual rates. Is it just annual leave? Is leave linked with sick leave? Just how they do it, and at what rate is an employee earning leave, and kind of those benchmarks. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? When do you then move on to a different rate of accrual? So that's the first topic. And the second topic is really changes to the minimum wage and basically getting our employees up to the minimum wage as it changes over the next, say, 3 years. And ultimately looking at a living wage of $15 per hour and what that might look like in terms of related compression. And so during this committee meeting, we basically divided up into subcommittees, and the subcommittees will go forth and do some research on the minimum wage and living wage discussion. We hope to start talking to the county about their recommendations. How can we take these steps without creating a huge amount of compression? And also kind of what they're looking at in terms of the future at a federal level and a state level. And the other thing that came up during the personnel committee meeting was that we realized we were short staff representation. So David's gonna just reach out to staff to see if anyone's interested in joining the personnel committee. We have enough board members, we just don't have enough staff members. So the personnel committee hopes to meet again on the 16th of February and kind of regroup. And so we might have another report at the February board meeting. It all just depends on if we're able to gather the research that we need.
Are there any questions or comments for Carla? This is really ending her service on the library board with a bang. These are two really important, big topics. So I really appreciate Carla's being willing to take these on.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you. I know this is a lot of work. Thank you very much.
I'm really appreciative of the people who have stepped up on the personnel committee. And to me, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I have been passionate about during my whole term. And so it just makes me feel good that there are other people on the board who are interested in compensation for staff members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Carla? Thanks, Carla. We'll look forward to seeing what your committees will bring to the board.
Hopefully we'll have good news.
Well, it's all important news.
Yeah. It's just hopefully the steps will be easy, and we can take advice from our localities and from peer libraries. So
Good, thanks. Moving on to old business. David has an update on the COVID response plan.
Yes, thank you. I will share with you the updates on the statistics that I shared in December, and also email those out so you'll have copies, not just me spewing them out. So JMRL remains in tier 3 of our COVID-19 response. We did have a pause of in-person branches for 7 days that finished last week. So currently we are, I think, at 12 days under the 10% positivity, the 7-day running average. So we did reopen after 7 straight days there. So we only missed a week of in-branch service, but it was good to have that metric. And I think it really caught the cusp of the spike here, which I'm hoping we're on the tail end of that particular spike. We also did have to stop appointments for several days at Louisa, as too many employees were out due to contact tracing. So it was just 2 days where they couldn't take appointments and they had curbside only. Still no positive tests among employees. Our protocols are holding well. So tier 3 service resumed mid last week, and we have had appointments since then. The one bit of good news that I did get last, or I guess 2 weeks ago Friday, from the health district is that JMRL staff are classified in phase 1B of the vaccination. So as essential workers, JMRL staff will be able to get vaccinated in the current phase. If you followed the local news recently, though, you know that without a supply of vaccine, that's still, it's still a long time. Late winter is what they're saying to get through this phase. So some staff, we got confirmation from the Blue Ridge Health Department on a Friday afternoon, set up the entire roster with the CDC that afternoon. Emails went out at like after 4 o'clock. Some staff were able to get February appointments because they got online that Friday afternoon and got a spot. So most of those vaccinations are late February, like the 24th and beyond. Those that got on the next morning working on Saturday, they were all gone for February. So there are no spots for people to sign up to get any vaccination appointments. So the rest of our staff is refreshing that daily to wait for the March vaccination slots to open. But as the newspaper's been reporting and the local news, it all depends on the amount of vaccine that the health district gets, because this vaccination is through the health district. Once that starts to open up a little bit, then they'll be able to offer more slots and our staff will get vaccinated. The hope, though, is that by the end of March, all of our staff will have had at least the first shot in the vaccination cycle. So that's great news in terms of getting the staff prepared, because otherwise that might have been summer for some folks. All right, let me share some statistics. Since July 1st, JMRL has put on 332 virtual programs that have been attended by 6,252 people. So since your last meeting a month ago, there's 37 extra programs serving 919 people. That's quite a few. I can't do the quick math on that, but that's good attendance. Circulation for July through the end of December is 515,000 items. These are December statistics I'm reporting on. December is the first month since the pandemic began where one of our branches come within 10% of their pre-pandemic circ, and it was the Nelson Memorial branch, which was only 8.8% off from December 2019 circulation numbers. A lot of that has to do with the new collection of books and just overall excitement for the new branch in Nelson and people coming to see. Of that circulation, 146,960 have been digital. So this is up 43.8% for the same period last year, which was already up from the year before. So as I've said repeatedly, that has been our fastest growth area for a long time. But with the pandemic, it's just every month 40% over where we were the month before and the same period in the fiscal year before. Over 23,000 new items have been ordered, cataloged, and processed since July 1st through the end of December. So this means since your meeting last month, 4,140 new items have hit the shelves. Since the pandemic began, over 45,000 people have signed on to use JMRL's Wi-Fi. We've made over 3,000 cards since the pandemic. 2,800 of those have been virtual. So only 200 cards out of that 3,000 have been at Tier 3 in-branch service, but consistently on a day-to-day basis, I check our system that we use to track people coming in, and there are notes that says coming to get a card, coming to get a card, coming to get a card. Over 4,500 people have made appointments for Tier 3 in-building service in September when it began. This is through January 20th. So that is 1,599 people since your last meeting. Crozet still leading the way with 1,103 appointments scheduled. Central 332, Gordon 180, Northside 530, Scottsville 51, Nelson 940, Louisa 550, and Greene 818. So at 5 or under people at a time, this is a lot of different groupings being made in a very safe way. It's gratifying to me to see these numbers because it's never an overwhelming amount. The protocols are in place to maintain distance between staff and individuals and each other. But we're still able to serve big chunks of our community that need to get into library buildings, and virtual services aren't enough. 546 people have used the in-building computer service in September, which is 237 more since your last meeting. So really between the end of December and now has been almost half of our in-branch computer usage. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Charlottesville area branches were open during this time. It's kind of the opposite of what I was expecting. I was expecting more computer sign up need in the outlying branches, but we're seeing more in the in-town branches. So all branches are currently offering Tier 3, expecting to stay in Tier 3 for a while. The EPC is meeting tomorrow afternoon on the docket or to discuss gloves and quarantining, whether or not it's time to loosen some of those restrictions as more and more science is showing that surface contact is not the way that this virus is transmitted. And also we're going to be looking at further data metrics to be evaluated. Any questions about where we are or where we're going?
I'd just like to make a comment. We, at least one of our staff members down at Nelson has gotten her first injection. But I think it's important for all of us to remember that this does not mean that we should decrease our attention to mask wearing and social distancing and being cautious, because right now there is only data that shows for the vaccines that are currently in use that there's a marked decrease in symptomatic infections, but we don't yet know whether there's a significant decrease in possible transmission from people who have been vaccinated and have picked up the virus, but are holding off symptoms because of their immunization status. So I would caution everybody to make sure that you're reassuring anyone that you come into contact with in the libraries and yourselves and your families to keep up your practices. It's going to be really important for the next year.
Yeah, I don't expect to loosen any of the guidelines on mask wearing either from the public or from the staff for quite a while, until we get some guidance from health department saying, okay, we're over that hurdle.
Right, exactly. That data is going to be quite a while in coming, I think.
I just saw something, and it was in like a normal, not a medical periodical, but it was some recommendation that someone was saying about wearing 2 masks, that was supposed to be better than 1. And so it's like, oh my goodness, the next thing you know, I'm going to have a Halloween mask on and like a mountain of these things on my face. That's why I don't leave the house. So
I have done that, Lisa. I've gone to situations where I knew there was going to be an unmasked individual indoors and worn 2 masks. So I also am not aware of the science on that, but can't hurt, right?
Exactly.
This is particularly an issue for those of us who are wearing cloth masks, not really medical masks that would cut down on the amount of transfer across the mask surfaces of very, very small things like viruses. The cloth masks that we're wearing are doing a pretty good job, but they're not perfect. And so I wouldn't, as David said, when you know you're going into a situation that is risky, it might not be a bad idea, but I don't think on a regular basis that this is something that people need to be doing right now.
David, I had my usual question about, are we thinking as we revise the protocols of starting to charge fines again at some point?
Yeah, Tony, the latest thinking on that is that once we can remove the quarantine period for materials, we can begin charging fines again. It's been difficult. One of the biggest problems we've had is folks getting notification about overdue items or having some sort of block on their card because the items are in quarantine, either because they were returned in branch or whatnot. And right now it's 3 days for all materials, but 5 days for the DVD, plastics, DVDs and CDs. So as soon as we can remove that restriction, we'll begin restoring overdue fines, and likely there'll be a grace period where we get people, acclimated to the idea again. But that might not be that far off. As I said, that's one of the things that's on the agenda for the Emergency Planning Committee to discuss tomorrow, the quarantine.
Is there something in particular, David or Tony, that fines bring to the library? Is it like a revenue need? Or is it just to get people to remember that these books are not their personal property?
No, it's a revenue need. The way that the regional library is set up, that money that comes in from fines and fees pays for all of the equipment that JMRL buys. That's not charged to our jurisdictions. So Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson don't pay for computers, furniture, things like that. That comes out of this equipment budget. So it's in our strategic plan, Lisa, to look at ways to replace that revenue and remove the overdue fines, because all the research now shows that it doesn't work as a deterrent. It's not actually bringing materials back, and in fact it's nothing but a barrier to access. But the way that JMRL is constructed right now, it is dependent upon those fines.
That's helpful. Thank you for explaining that to me, because it does seem like a strange revenue model that you need people to break the rules in order for your budget to be sustainable.
And
so I certainly contributed, you're welcome, to many fines over the years. And as I told Ben, for the last 20 years, he's a librarian at UVA, I was like, they need these. I'm doing my part.
We always talk
about getting where I put these books.
But we have removed fines for juvenile cards, so cards for under 16-year-olds. And we've seen in the Valley, the 3 Valley library systems have all gotten rid of fines since the pandemic began. So Augusta, Waynesboro, and Stanton. So there's definitely a national movement to remove library fines. And it's something that JMRL is aware of and we talked about in the strategic planning process. It's a matter of figuring out, like right now we are reliant on those funds and figuring out how to replace that or ways to do without.
Great. Thank you so much for that elaboration.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions about this? Moving forward with the COVID plan. All right. The next thing is, Mike, we have a vote on policy 1.6, gifts of non-library materials. That should be in your packet with all the revisions that were introduced last month.
Do you want me to screen share that, Mike?
If you can, great. That'd be great. So we did just read through this last month, and as Marcy said, the red line version has been in your packet. The basic changes here were to clarify, who makes decisions, and I think this makes a little more clear that the director has sort of the first discretion about how to handle these, but he has the ability to, at his discretion, to bring it to the board of trustees. We wanted to clarify the idea of restricted gifts or gifts that were limited in some way, and we wanted to just clean that up a little bit and make sure that happens in writing, because we identified that there were there were examples where there had been sort of verbal agreements, and then later the donor there might be a discrepancy in their mind, or the library might not be sure. Somebody down the road might not be sure what had happened previously. So wanted to clarify that. And then a little bit about third parties who might do fundraising on behalf of the library. This policy probably isn't binding on them, but we wanted to just sort of indicate that we'd like that to be coordinated through the director. There's some good reasons for that, to make sure things are not acting at cross purposes. So those are the major goals here.
Is there any further discussion on these changes in the policy? Mike, can you make a motion for us to accept this policy?
Sure, I'll move that we adopt the revisions to the gifts of non-library materials policy.
Thank you. We'll take this as a group vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? So it's unanimous. Thanks. All right, David, an update on the fiscal year 22 budget?
Yes, thank you. So we're at the phase in the budget cycle now where we're awaiting the proposed budgets that our jurisdictions are going to be reviewing. So we have not seen any of those yet, just early indications of what those might include. One thing, so we were just talking about the equipment budget based on Lisa's question there, and JMRL has held all equipment budget requests from managers for fiscal year 21, which is the current fiscal year, while we weren't getting that much revenue in because there were no overdue fines. We are going to begin purchasing those now for the remainder of the year. I wanted to correct something that I said was in the minutes for last meeting. I said that nothing was coming into the equipment request and nothing was been spent. And of course, Jerry was not here to correct me live during the last meeting, but this is not true. We have been steadily buying IT equipment and a few smaller non-COVID related items from the equipment budget. And over $20,000 has come in since July. So I said nothing was coming in. It turns out that most of that was coming from fine payments that people were making online. So we don't see them at the service desks or whatnot. They were paying them at home. They either had a lost book or they had accumulated fines, and that was quite a bit more than I was expecting. So that was good to hear. And
Can I ask you to elaborate on that? You said $20,000 had come in since July?
July of last year, yes.
So those were fines that had accrued before March of last year?
Correct, that were sitting on your account. So if you went and logged onto your account and you wanted to check out an ebook or do anything with the library, it showed up and said you owe $5 and you just paid it with a credit card there. So there wasn't cash coming in, but when we checked the accounts that those accrued to with the city of Charlottesville, there was over $20,000 there.
It was just that period of accrual that I was confused about there.
It was just since the beginning of the fiscal year. We just looked to verify that, how much had come in. Jerry, you can raise your hand if you have anything to add to that. Does that make sense, though, Thomas?
Yes, paid since the beginning of the fiscal year, but accrued prior to Q4 of fiscal year 20.
Yes. Or potentially they had books that were billed during the pandemic and they didn't reach out to staff to say, hey, I can't come in and this book is billed on my account. They just paid it. So that's the potential too. And there is the chance that some of those might come back at some point. We have, I think, a 6-month window for those to be returned to say, oh, hey, I found the book that I couldn't find. So yes, it's payments made towards fines and fees that have accrued at any time. Jerry does have a comment, so I'm going to allow him to speak to that. Go ahead, Jerry.
It also includes, we don't have a specific breakdown, but it also includes fees that folks have paid for, whether it's small, but faxing, fines, faxing, copying, etc.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other updates on the budget?
Yes,
David?
there are. Sorry, I get distracted. So the other thing that I distracted myself, Thomas, don't worry, that JMRL is going to do is push the equipment requests from managers for a bit later this year because we weren't buying things that came in from the fiscal year 21 requests. So normally around now and into February, we'd be collecting requests for fiscal year 22 for equipment. We've pushed that to April. So the board will still have plenty of time, both the budget committee and the full board, to review those before they make it into our final budget. It's just going to be a bit later in the process because it doesn't make any sense to be, kind of wish list thinking of things needed in the future when you haven't received the things that were needed for this year. One other thing that I wanted to bring up that I've been in touch with Marcy and Thomas about a little bit is that there are some funds that are going to be available this fiscal year that were unanticipated in our budgeting process last year, specifically salary savings, which is kind of an annual thing that we look at, but maybe more so than other years, positions delayed on onboarding and hiring in the beginning of Q1. Some leave without pay for medical situations throughout the pandemic, and just various attrition where folks are leaving. And the other two are an increase in state aid from the state. So they come in 4 quarterly payments. In the first 2 payments, we got X amount of dollars, and then we received notification recently that a budget amount that we had thought was going to be full for the year and wasn't, was actually added mid-year by the state legislation. So there's more money coming in to state aid. It was an additional $1 million for the whole state. So it was JMRL's share of that. And it has to be spent, of course, before the end of the fiscal year. And the third was a retirement forfeiture from the city. So this is money that JMRL has paid into retirement funds for employees that didn't vest. They ended up leaving before they would get that money back. So basically the retirement company sits on that funding and uses it to pay for expenses until it reaches a high enough number where the city says, okay, we want that back. And JMRL will receive a credit for that amount of money. So I'd like to ask Thomas, and we can discuss this offline here, but to call a budget committee to discuss recommendations for the board to make, or for the budget committee to make to the board for ways to, for expenditures to make this fiscal year to handle those. So nothing to vote on today, but I'd like the budget committee to get together and come up with some recommendations to bring back to the full board.
That sounds fine by me. I'll send out an email here this afternoon and just survey what times work for folks.
Great, thank you, Thomas. That's
Any
all.
questions or comments about David's report? Okay, library director's report.
You might have seen a lot of publicity recently over the Dial-A-Story program that JMRL has actually been doing since last summer, but recently got picked up because we switched systems a little bit to make it a bit more efficient. This has been spearheaded by Angela Critics, our children's services manager. And basically, there's been a concern about access for literacy and all sorts of tools for folks that have limited broadband. It's a toll-free number where folks can call in basically and listen to a story, have a story read for their children. And the new system that we're using is going to allow for even more flexibility there, where we can do kind of more than one at a time. So you might have a Spanish version of it. You might have something that is a serialized version or whatnot. So we had a nice write-up in the Daily Progress, and all the news stations were very excited about it. So much so that at least one of them has offered to have some of their on-air folks read stories for the Dial-A-Story program.
Awesome.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So it is, the phone number is 434-443-2300 if anybody wants to call and check out the Dial-A-Story offerings. And just go ahead.
There's no age limit on the people that can listen to the stories, right?
No, there's no age limit on who can listen. Just a reminder about 2 events coming up here in a couple hours is the Where Do We Go From Here? Dr. King's book discussion that the university has hosted as part of their MLK Day celebration. So there's a panel this evening. You can go to the university's MLK celebration to find a link for that. It's a Zoom event. JMRL did help distribute some books for that event. And also I'll be in a program hosted by the Historical Society along with Lorenzo Dickerson this week on Wednesday night at 6:30 to talk about 100 years of library service in the area, the Charlottesville area here, and to get an update on Lorenzo's work on a film about 100 years of library service in the community. JMRL is also working with the Historical Society to have a series of panels put up on the 3rd floor of the Central Library telling the history of library services in the community for the centennial. This came as a suggestion from the working group that looked at the Swanson case courtroom. somebody was saying, a member of the public said, well, I've learned so much about the history of the library here and about the segregated history of the library and also about the Swanson case itself. It'd be great to have that information all collected somewhere. So we're working with the Historical Society to this summer have an exhibit in the hallway on the 3rd floor here. We've had excellent attendance for the story walk at Gordon Avenue in the garden. It really is amazing the creativity that JMRL staff have exhibited. The book this month is Kwame Alexander's The Undefeated with beautiful illustrations by Kadir Nelson. So if you go, maybe not this week with the rain and the poor weather, but if you go to the garden area in the parking lot of Gordon Avenue, there's a walk where you can take and read periodic signage that takes you through the story there. So I recommend if you're looking for a nice family-friendly thing to do, to try that out. Lisa, did you have a question about that?
I am trying to applaud and I cannot find the applause reaction. So it just looks like I keep waving my hand and I'm just trying to say brava or bravo.
Yes, excellent. Well, I hope you go check that out. And last week, the Louisa County Board of Supervisors recognized 30 years of service from Jolynn Bullock with a proclamation thanking her for 30 years of service to Louisa County. Thanks to Wendy for attending. It was a lovely proclamation, and it was very nice of the Louisa County Board of Supervisors to take the time out of their very busy schedule to thank a library employee. And finally, I do have a sad note. A lot of you who have been here for a while have seen lots of continuing education from Sarah Hamfeld, who is the Adult Services Coordinator for the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library System. Sarah is leaving us for new opportunities. So it's a big hole to fill. When we did the committee's work last month, her name popped up all the time, but I wanted to publicly thank her for her service to JMRL and what a great job she's done and big shoes to fill. That's all I have to report.
All right. Any questions for David? Are there any other matters that board members would like to raise before the board at this meeting? And future agenda items, it looks like we have quite a few committee reports that we'll be expecting, and then the working group report as well through the through the policy committee report, Mike. Are there any other agenda items, David, that?
Yeah, there's the potential that we would have our audit for fiscal year 20 finished. There's a draft, I believe, that's awaiting review. So that may or may not happen. It's been a slow process, but by February, we should have that. So even if it's just a draft, we'll have something to share and discuss.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any agenda items that David and I have overlooked? Excellent. Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to end the meeting? Thank you, Tony. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to ending this meeting? Thank you very much. See you next month, if not before.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.